Pauline Tully.
And good morning to everyone here, and thank you for presenting at the committee meeting this morning. I want to especially thank Gavin, Kerry and Wendy here for sharing their lived experiences with us, and indeed commend all the organisations, Walk, National Learning Network and the NCSE for the work that they do as well. We're talking about education and further education and training here this morning, and we've referenced Article 24, which is around inclusive education, Article 24 of the UNCRPD. And I know when I speak to parents of children with additional needs about inclusive education, they get very fearful because they think, OK, my child with an additional need is going to be sent into a mainstream school and not have the supports they need. And we're all nervous about our children at starting school, whether that's primary school or especially going into secondary school. But if they have an additional need and you feel that the supports are not there, you are extra nervous about it. So I suppose I would be interested in your vision of an inclusive education and how that can be achieved, because we're hearing about many students with intellectual disabilities leaving school without qualifications. So obviously we do not have inclusive education, we do not have an education system that works if students are leaving second level without any qualification and having to pursue other avenues to obtain one. And then it's proven that with the proper support they are very capable of obtaining their qualifications and moving on. Also, I suppose, Paul, I'm very interested in the school inclusion model that you referenced there, and if you could expand on this. I think it's a pilot programme at the moment, but what we're hearing about is the new progressive disability model in disability services being rolled out, and what we're hearing is that supports are being taken out of special schools. So the speech and language therapist or the occupational therapist or psychologists are being removed, where they've always been there to support the students. And parents are very nice, because this has been done without a risk assessment, and especially the students with the very complex needs are really nervous because they feel that there's a real danger to their students having had this done. And yet you're talking about a system where we're putting therapists into schools to support students in schools, and I think it's an excellent model. I know there's a difficulty there with frontline healthcare workers. There's not enough of them, and that needs to be looked at and planned for. But what we're seeing now is that students have to be taken out of school, brought to a service. Now, that's when the services get up and running and provision is being given, which is not happening at the moment, but we're hoping that it will. But it means removing a student from a school for maybe hours in a day, when if the services were available in the school, that they could receive them there. And then with the therapists working with the teachers, the teachers are learning as well. Because, again, I think strongly that teachers in particular need to have training, disability training, as part of their teaching programme, and that's not happening. It's very limited. I'm coming from an educational background myself, so I know that it's not given. And while many teachers and parents will tell you this, many teachers in a school will do their utmost to support their students. Not all of them do, and some of them have very archaic attitudes. So training would be very important, and training for employers is very important, because a lot of us, as was said by a witness last week, we're not familiar with disability. And how do we get familiar with disability? It's by having disabled people in our schools and in our workplaces and so on. But we can't do that until people are willing to have the training and open up and accept people. And I suppose just the cost of disability is mentioned again and again. The Indicon report that was published before Christmas indicated the cost of disability is anywhere between 9,500 and 12,000. And again, Kerry, you mentioned there about the lack of flexibility to pursue courses in college that might take somebody with a disability a little bit longer than those without. And also the fact that there's no top-up grant, and the fear of the loss of the disability payment and the secondary entitlements as well is another thing that needs to be tackled. So look, I know I've mentioned a good few things there, but I think your presentations were excellent, and I just would love to hear your comments further on what I've mentioned there.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. Deputy Tully, thank you very much for all those comments. You've certainly covered an awful lot, so I'll do my best to respond to them in the order that you made reference to them, if that's okay. First of all, we're really looking forward in the NCSE to launching our policy advice, and it is at an advanced stage in development, so that will be forthcoming in the next few months. And, you know, at the NCSE, like as I mentioned in our opening statement, you know, we have a vision of an inclusive educational system, and also recognise the fact that it is going to take time to have that progressive realisation of a fully inclusive system. You brought up some really interesting comments, and it's great, you know, that you're coming from the perspective of teachers, because it certainly is when you're on the ground and you see what's happening in schools that, you know, you have a very real sense of what's actually going on. But first of all, you referenced the progressing disabilities and the rollout of progressing disabilities nationally. We wouldn't have a role in that. It really is a matter for the Minister for Health and his colleagues with regard to how that is progressing, and the changes in relation to the provision of supports in the special schools and that we have. With regard to the school inclusion model, that the first iteration of that was actually a demonstration project where we worked in tandem with our colleagues in the Department of Children, the HSE and the NCSE and the Department of Education to pilot a project where therapists were working in early years settings and in our schools to support that model of practice. And the first iteration of that was you know, early year settings and primary and post-primary and special schools in 75 early years and 75 school settings. And there was an initial report done on that, which I referenced in my opening statement. And certainly it was very well received. And then we had COVID, and our therapists from the HSE were removed from the schools because they had to address frontline issues that were cropping up at the time. So the project was paused, and it had to be reviewed with regard to moving forward from the recommendations of that early demonstration project, how it could be embedded, and the school inclusion model was developed as a result. So that project was paused, and we've had, you know, notwithstanding the difficulties that we've had in accessing therapists to this project, simply because there aren't enough therapists qualifying and on the ground to be able to fill these posts, and that would be a concern across both health and education at the moment. But from the feedback that we have got, our therapists and our behavioural practitioners returned to schools in October of this year in collaboration with our NEPS colleagues, and the early feedback that we are getting on the ground, and obviously this is not, you know, the data hasn't been gathered yet in relation to this, but what we have been told in schools is that the early supports that they had prior to the project being paused, when they went back into schools, teachers were still using those supports and they were still embedding those supports, and it really demonstrated, you know, on the ground that capacity building model is working very well in schools. So for example, our therapy colleagues have developed like a sensory spaces booklet, for example, which has been disseminated to all primary schools, and they also provided supports for post-primary around movement breaks to address the sensory needs of our students, and that those practices have continued and they've been very much embedded at the moment. So the early experiences of teachers having access to therapists to build capacity in the schools, you know, have been very, very positive to date, and they're very welcomed in schools, and teachers are very open to that support. What I would say is that it would be very important, you know, for your constituents, wider community, to recognise that with a building capacity model, it means that the NCSE and our colleagues in education, the idea is that we develop a knowledge base and an understanding of disabilities in our schools via the teachers and through teacher professional learning initiatives. So the teachers, in collaboration with special needs assistants to support the care needs of, you know, those very high needs students, are embedded and supported. It is not therapists working directly with students, and I mean the therapists in the NCSE, the speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, behaviour practitioners. Our colleagues in NEP still work on a one-to-one basis with students, which is different, and it's just really important that people recognise that. Research has demonstrated that capacity building models have a far greater long-term impact on student as opposed to this one-to-one therapy approach. And I know that is a mindset that you know will need to change over time, because we recognise recognise that we can reach a higher number of students and support a wider number of students across the whole system, and not just students that have disabilities. This benefits all students within a whole community, to build an inclusive culture in our schools, which I think is something that is really important for us to recognise. And in relation to that, we're very much, and I know it came up with all the speakers today, that philosophy of embedding a universal design approach is very important to this work of building capacities, to look at spaces in schools and to be creative and open and supportive around that, to ensure that our students are supported as much as possible within the school space. And I'm not sure, Deputy, if you have any other questions that sort of would address the main issues that you mentioned there to me earlier.
Yes, Chairman. Deputy Tully, just to respond on the question of vision, I guess, look, from our presentation today, you'll have seen LNN and the REA group. We operate within both the mainstream and a specialist setting. I guess our vision certainly would be to promote access to education for all people with disabilities, and we would envisage, I suppose, a model where all of those needs can be met. The needs of people with mild, moderate, severe and profound disabilities can be met, we believe, within an overall kind of education ecosystem with mainstream provision, student support services and specialist training for people who need kind of higher levels of support. I mentioned in the presentation, I alluded to an example of the FET College of the Future, which is obviously something that our colleagues in SOLAS and the ETBs have been taking from kind of page to stage over the last kind of 18 months since the launch of the FET strategy. And again, that model, I suppose, envisages a kind of a multi-campus kind of delivery, but effectively with one front door, albeit virtually. And I think from our point of view, like kind of segmenting kind of services as one thing or t'other doesn't serve anybody. A lot of the concerns that have been expressed here today have been around transitioning and moving between, whether that's from secondary into post-secondary, whether it's been kind of moving from training into employment, and that suggests that seamless movement, we still to take Paula's point, we've a good bit of work to go, but the model should be that there is a level of need. That need is met by different agencies or organisations at different times and at different ways, with some people requiring more intensive support at certain times, and then later being able to progress to maybe to less support or different support over time. So certainly that would be, I guess, the vision that we would have for certainly the further education training space.
If I could just come back to the point that Deputy Tully made about the financial side of it. It is huge, and it's huge for anyone with a disability at any level trying to get back into education. You mentioned the report that's been out last year, which shows the disability tax, that it costs us just extra for every single part of our lives. And obviously, the more profound disability, the extra those costs again. Now, I'm quite fortunate. I'm in Dublin, and I want to attend a Dublin university. But even though I'm in Finglas and DCU would be where I attend, to get the bus there from Finglas South is quite a big deal. It takes quite a while. There's walking involved. If you want to do it quicker, you have to change bus. So it's much easier for me to drive. And yet the cost, as all of us here know, of trying to keep a car on the road. Now, try now to do that with a disability payment, and try to do that when you've been in receipt of a disability payment for over a decade. You know, you don't have the resources, you don't have the savings, and you're struggling day to day, and then you have these extra expenses that come in. And there's absolutely no provision anywhere within the system. Not within your community welfare officer, not within any of those areas. So if we're really talking, and obviously this is true for people with disabilities going back into work, but if we're honest and we want people with a disability or multiple disabilities to get back into training at whatever level that is, and to be able to re-enter the labour market, we have to recognise those additional costs. I spent 2 months last year trying to attend university remotely on my phone because I dropped my laptop, my 12-year-old laptop, and this time there was no resurrecting it. It was gone. And it took me 2 months. And in the end, I did manage to find a little pocket of funding. And I did manage to get myself a laptop, which took weeks and weeks to do that. But that was it, because I don't have the resources. I'm very advantaged in many ways, but financially, I don't have those resources. I don't have that family support for things like laptops, for the type of phones you need, the apps and stuff you need, and they're not covered, as a matter of fact. So again, if you're looking at people with disabilities who also have economic disadvantage, who come from low-income areas, low-income personal situations, you have to be realistic, and you say, unless you have a top-up grant there, unless you provide certain things as a given, it's all just nice words. You're all saying, again, it's a little bit like the AT I was talking about. You're saying all these things are over here, but you need these 4 steps to get there, and we're not going to help you with those 4 steps. Because there's a presumption within all the social welfare models that I've ever used for disability that you have a family that supports you, and that you're not a full-grown adult who's been living on your own and supporting yourself for quite a while. So the presumption is that the gaps that are there, that the absences are there, that people have families that come in and make up that. And you're going to find more and more people like myself who've acquired disabilities, survive terrible falls and brain injuries, like we've also heard about today, or the type of illness that I got, and then I acquired disabilities. And we're hopefully going to survive more and live for longer. And we want full and meaningful lives. And education is part of that. But you need to give us the social capital and the resources we need to access it. It's a little bit like that cartoon where we all know, where all the different animals are asked to climb a tree. Do you know what I mean? But one is an elephant and one is a monkey, and we're all saying, but sure, it's an equal opportunity. Everyone just has to climb that tree there. So we need a little bit of honesty. Like, we're either willing to recognise the disability tax, the fact it costs us more to live, and increase the social wealth supports accordingly, or we're not. And then we need to stop with all the aspirational talk, to be quite honest. And we're either serious about allowing people with disabilities and helping people with disabilities to access education and giving them the extra resources that they need, or again, we're not. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Deputy Tully, for your insightful points. I suppose one of the things that I would say, and what I've always seen, is that, Ireland produces fantastic policies. But what we don't do very well is actually being able to put the policies into practice. And we don't do change management well. And I suppose what we need to start with is a zero tolerance for exclusion. And we need to look at the standards and how we measure them standards, which is what we're not doing. And we need to look at the beliefs and attitudes that actually exist around people with disabilities within the school and how we support them. And I think until we do that, and until we do a piece of change management, and until we actually really nail what the culture is that we expect, I don't think that change will actually happen. I also think that we have loads of pilot schemes that run in schools, but then they're never converted when actually research shows that they're really, really effective into being programs that just operate as part of the school system. So we have a program that runs in Louth and in Dublin, and we have huge research that says these work and they create amazing outcomes for people that have an intellectual disability. And they're still pilots. And we're still every year going back with the beg and bowl to see, can we get funding to sustain these pilots? They should be programs now. And it's not just our program. There are loads of really great programs out there that are pilots. And so much time is wasted trying to get money and to find a stream to sustain them, rather than letting us get on with the job that we need to do, which is actually on the ground floor. Thanks, Million.
Just 2 things I want to speak about, if I can, in relation to bus pass and the difference in me monetary now that I'm working and I have a job. So in relation to the bus pass, before my accident, I drove everywhere. I drove everybody everywhere. It was my independence. Even if it was just to go out into the car and turn on Radio Nova, just to have a sing-song and just get away from everybody. This was what I did. So that took away my independence. When I got my bus pass, before I got my bus pass, I was bringing everybody, as I said. When I got when I had my accident, I couldn't drive. I was relying on everybody to kind of, when they were dropping kids to school, to take time out of, we had to do a rota for me that I could get a lift to go to places that I needed to go to. So I was dependent on everybody. And then what joy I had when I got my bus pass. This was my key to the outdoor world. I didn't have to ask anybody. I didn't get it. It didn't come easily at all. I had to go through an awful lot of paperwork, and I had to prove an awful lot. I had to go in and pay doctors to just €50 just to sign a form, which I had to borrow. But what my point is, please, please, please make a bus pass for life. Because my disability, I'm going to have it for life, and it'll make my life easier, and I will have, the main thing, peace of mind. Now, the other thing I want to say is the NLN gave me the initiative and the help to go out and get a job. This was delighted. The work I found, the people in the area that I work in, they're all understanding, reasonable, and they're just lovely people. They do anything for you. But when I got my first paycheck, what does the government do? They take not all my money, but they took a big chunk of my money on tax. Now, I'm not sure why this was. I don't know where to go to find out. The Citizens Information Bureau, you go in there and you get a ticket and you're waiting hours and hours and hours. So that kind of doesn't help. But when I lost my individuality, my invalidity pension, just like that. I got a letter before my first week was over. We're taking it off you. I was happy because I know now my bus pass, I don't have to get it renewed until 2025. So that gives me some time. But the money that I have in my pocket would have been more when I was on invalidity pension than it is when I'm working. The real reason that I'm working is because it's for this, the mental health. I can get out, I can socialise. When COVID was on, I was in the NLN doing a course with the wonderful James Conroy, and I was socialising with people. He sorted out where we were. We'd broke it into two groups. One group did home Monday, Tuesday. The other group done from the office Wednesday, Thursday, and we mixed it up that way, which was really good. But where was I going with that? So the thing, money is very hard, and my husband is working, and he does literally support me. But I have my bus pass, which is my independence for getting out and about. But to think that now I'm working, I'm paying money towards everybody, towards, I'm proud to be able to pay money towards that. But they don't do you any favours. The invalidity pension I was on, why would I not just carry on getting that, taking it off the government? But no, I have pride, and I like to support Ireland, I suppose, and thanks very much. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much.